climate change or the ecological disaster, but climate change as spiritual practice, as sacred activism, as, I'll let you fill it in. Where does that land?
Here is what I think is going on the deep level of our civilizational myth and identity when we're talking about climate change. It's the dawning recognition that self and other are intimately connected, that humans and nature are intimately connected, that the well-being of one affects the well-being of the other inescapably. So it is a evolution of our consciousness of ourselves, of our identity. And so, yeah, that is a spiritual practice to take in. I mean, this is a classical initiatory threshold in, you could call it spirituality or any, just like the development of ourselves. Like when you realize that you have been causing harm and you didn't realize it before. When you have a new awakening to the consequences of your choices that you had been oblivious to before, and you take that information in, it's going to change you. It's going to make that set of choices and those actions no longer tolerable.
Yeah. So let me make sure I'm understanding you. That really, to break apart the whole into, the ecological disaster over here and spiritual practice over here is a problem. There's an indivisibility. Of course, we love. When I was lay ordained in the Zen tradition, the master wrote, throughout the universe, one body revealed. And so if we come to the recognition and awakening of the unitive intimacy of the cosmos, of course we love it. Of course we're love without boundaries, wanting to serve. It's a spiritual impulse to care for that which we are a part of. In fact, it's just one whole. Am I getting your?
Yes. And on the other hand, climate change can also be, like the issue of climate change, it can also be a form of, you might call it political bypass, where you're avoiding spiritual issues by displacing your attention onto something that is safely externalized and that provides a ready formula for action, and where you can count yourself as a good, ethical, moral person if you follow this formula of reducing your carbon footprint or displaying certain tokens of virtue, of environmental virtue. Okay, taking care of that one, but that could leave the real issue still covered up. And so I don't think that really it's about, I guess, being honest with ourselves where our activism is coming from, or where, like, the many places it is coming from. It might be coming, in part from a very sincere desire to serve life on Earth. And it might come in part from the desire to gain acceptance and approval from a social in-group that we identify with, and kind of many, many things mix into it. So I think, like, activism in general can be, especially if we're sincere about our activism, if we really do care, then if we're using that activism to serve something else, then we're not going to be as effective as activists. Because if you're telling yourself and telling other people that you're serving the Amazon, but you're actually serving your social dominance in a certain circle, then when that moment of choice comes where maybe you have to do something to serve the Amazon that doesn't get you approval from that in-group, what are you going to do? What are you going to do if you decide that your environmental movement has got something wrong? And it is incumbent upon you to dissent from that particular idea. Then, if your motive had been acceptance and approval from that in-group, then it's going to be pretty hard to dissent. So, and this actually, this is kind of my own story. You know, I am to this day an ardent environmentalist, and there are certain components of the dominant narrative of climate change that I don't agree with, especially the solutions that are based on a superficial carbon metric that lead to gigantic hydropower facilities, for example, that are currently destroying the inner Niger Delta, or biofuels plantations that are devouring huge swaths of land that had been, you know, that had been part of a subsistence peasant economy, or had been pristine ecosystems and get converted to, you know, palm oil plantations. Like, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on under the cover of carbon numbers, or even, like, you know, all these electric batteries and like all this electrification that's demanding new mines all over the world. Like, anyway, like, that could be a whole debate, you know, but suffice it to say that my own convictions deviate from those of some of those of the climate movement.
One of the things I hear you saying, you know, it's implicit, is, you know, true courage is going to be needed, because it's not about just picking a Tesla or a Prius and then giving money to the Sierra Club and then winning the approval of others. Of course, you know, being esteemed by others is important, but if that becomes more important than what we are seeing is the truth, we're not furthering our spiritual practice, our spirituality, and we're not furthering our activism either. And so the courage to step out and say, here's what I see to the best of my ability, even though I may encounter some strong disapproval, is really a big part of this.
Yes. And to tie it to what we call spiritual practice, like, what's really scary for a lot of us isn't even the disapproval of others. It's our own disapproval. It's our own self-image, which, you know, it's tied in with the approval of others. And when we attempt to leverage that to enforce certain behavior, whether it's in others or ourselves, when we leverage guilt, essentially, then we're not actually in service. I mean, we're in service to guilt actually is fear of getting caught, fear of being caught in the act, of being seen doing something that your narrative says is bad. And a lot of us carry a lot of guilt because the modern way of life is destroying the planet. So here again, you know, this is a deep spiritual inquiry. But the danger, the way to alleviate guilt is to make sure you don't get caught. That could be by abandoning the bad behavior, but it could be just hiding it, you know, behind some carbon offsets or something like that. Really, where does courage come from? It comes from love. It comes from, you care about something so much that you don't really care about relatively speaking, you don't care about the ego consequences that are involved in serving this thing that you love so much. Like a parent whose child is in danger will have courage, because nothing else is important compared to that. And when we fall in love with earth, with a forest, with some living part of a living earth, then we discover that we have courage too. That's what that's where I think that the environment, this is more of a political conversation then, but that's really where I've been urging the environmental movement to turn. Not to try to leverage, do you want to qualify as a good person? Then do this. Like that's actually a very insulting view of human nature. Like if I have to bribe you into performing actions that take care of other beings, like that means that I don't actually believe that that's what you want to do. I have to stand in the place that knows that you want to serve life and beauty on earth. And I have to know that for myself too. If I'm going to know it for you, I have to know it for myself. So for me, that is really what the spiritual practice of environmentalism is. It's about getting in touch with what you actually love and knowing yourself as a lover of life.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful. Well, so how do we lead ourselves? How do you lead people who are sincere? So let's say there are these sort of two forces in me. On the one hand, I love my gigantic Hummer. I mean, I don't really have one, but let's just say I did. And I go off-roading, I do whatever. On the other hand, I do sincerely love life and every aspect of life. So there's this sort of selfishness and this selflessness. How do we make I don't know what you would call it, the transcendent move away from ego and more to the love of spirit or soul? And
let me just go to that example that you gave.
Yeah.
So there you are, with your off-road vehicle tearing up the trails, and you also really love nature. Mm-hmm. So I can say, hey, brother, maybe you're not aware of what your off-road vehicle has been doing to the forest. Like, it's going to be painful for you to see what I'm seeing here, but I know that you care so much that I'm going to show you what's been happening. And if I come with that spirit of like, I know you, I know that if you knew this, that you wouldn't do it anymore. And I know that you care more than you care about your off-road experience. And if that's not just an ideology I have about human beings, but if I actually see that in you, then I can exert a very powerful invitation for you to look at something you haven't been looking at before. Because you know that I'm coming in friendship.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to catch you and a bad act, I'm your brother, man. I'm here for you. And I know you. I know what a beautiful person you are. Like anyone, if we can stand in that, then a lot can change.
That's great, because that's why in this fictitious thing, that's why I would take the time to go out off-roading. I don't want to be on pavement. I want to be way out in wild nature, and I take this gas-guzzling vehicle out there. So you're actually connecting with something that I value very deeply.
Yeah. And also there's a sense of, like, I might not say that to you at all, unless I sense there's some part of you that actually is kind of over the off-road Hummer, that like I can ally with that part of yourself. It's like, have you ever noticed that your favorite part is when you turn the motor off and you're deep in the woods by yourself? Like, what if you just had that part? And you weren't making all that huge noise and scaring off all the birds and stuff. Like, I might come from that direction, but whatever you do, you have to come as a friend. And I'm not saying that, like, okay, like if you're, confronting an Exxon drilling project somewhere, okay, maybe you go to court. Okay, I'm not saying like you always, that you never fight an abuse of power in this world. But let's not let that be our only or our default strategy for creating change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. A lot of people who come to these events identify as very spiritual people. They're meditators, let's say. And so sometimes they'll come and say, well, all right, I've meditated, I've experienced, transcendence. I don't know how to do my activism from that place. The activism out there is just, there's so much fight and energy, and I, I don't want to trade my equanimity for just yelling and screaming against the other side. How do I allow my spirituality and wakefulness, when it's there, to be a demonstration of love in an ecological activist way?
Yes. Okay, so you go to the reason why it's actually even called spiritual practice. What are you practicing for? You're practicing for exactly those situations where you're out in the world and people are screaming at each other and triggering, all of your anger and all of your upset and your trauma and so forth. But because you've practiced, you don't immediately and unconsciously react. You maybe have internal reactions, but a mindfulness practice, you notice what those actions are. So you become no longer their slave, but you're able to take them in, you're able to see them and respond from a different place. That's the whole point of spiritual practice in this. This is why we step out sometimes, into meditation to prepare for this incredible drama that we have chosen to incarnate into. Like, if you are always in the drama, you lose yourself. You forget that this is actually a drama and it becomes a totalizing reality. So you step out sometimes and then you come back into it with this background awareness that this is a play that we are writing. We are the authors of our roles in it. And what role do I want to play in this drama? And where do I want the storyline to go? Like that's the whole idea, I think, for me, why I call it even spiritual practice.
Mm. And how does one, how does one locate one's particular place? So there's this ecological disaster that has been unfolding for quite some time. And there's this calling from love to serve, but there's just so many different things. How do you suggest? So I've parked my Hummer and I've practiced and I want to apply it, applied spirituality. But where? Do you have any guidance for how to find one's place as a activist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You look at what you care about the most. What moves you to care? Maybe it's something that fits just perfectly into the popular ideas of how to save the planet. But maybe it's something that doesn't fit into those ideas. And you can't justify why you care so much about, I don't know, one community garden or one beautiful building even. Like I don't think that the human world is outside the natural world. And the uglification of our built environment is part and parcel of our destruction of natural beauty, all part of the same thing. So what do you care about? That's the guide. The heart is the guide that will locate you in just the right place at just the right time to do just the right thing. And so it's just a matter of learning to trust that. And also like that, what you care about evolves according to the information that you take in. So there is also, a intellectual curiosity that's a component of this, and also an emotional curiosity, like to fully feel those things that you had not been feeling before through, for example, a grief process by which you integrate the preciousness of what has been lost, and through the celebration of beauty, through the appreciation of beauty, through really taking in how beautiful and sacred this world is. And then trusting that both the beauty and the loss will operate within you, and they change you, They change you, and they attune that heart instrument to orient even better toward what is yours to do. I guess another aspect of climate change and spirituality is it poses a fundamental question which is, what are we here for? The problem with a lot of climate discourse today, or a problem with it, is that it casts the situation in terms of our survival. We're going to be doomed if we don't change our ways. Okay, should that be our primary motivation? Survival. On a personal level, should that be your primary motivation? No, you're going to die someday. On a species level, is that why we're here? If so, then, okay, what if we could survive on a dead Earth with, synthetic food and hydroponics factories and machines to regulate the atmosphere and pave the whole baby over and convert it into one gigantic parking lot and waste dump and live in Jetsons like bubble cities? What if we could do that? If you are basing environmental arguments on survival, then you have no leg to stand on. But that's not why we're here. And everyone can recognize that would leave us so desperately impoverished that we would go crazier and crazier and crazier. We would create hell. That is actually what's at stake. It's not survival, it's hell. So, yeah, and that's that. I mean, if there's any spiritual question, that's what it is. It's, what am I here for? What are we here for as humanity? And I think it is to amplify and enhance and increase the amount of beauty and life on this earth. People used to understand that. Look at buildings prior to the 20th century. They were not made to maximize efficiency per dollar of investment, to maximize floor space per dollar. These buildings were unnecessarily elaborate and beautiful and aesthetic. Yeah. They were gifts to the world in an important sense. That's why we're here, to be a gift to the world, because in reciprocity for the gift of life that we've received.